Hello, I'm Enrique Cerna, and welcome to MOHAI, the Museum of History and Industry here on South Lake Union, and our community conversation on the reality of fake news. When Donald Trump launched his campaign for the presidency, he took aim at the media and his coverage of him with the constant refrain, fake news. Of course, after he took office, it continued. In late August at a rally in Pennsylvania, his cry of fake news was especially loud.
But they can make anything bad because they are the fake, disgusting news.
Ashley Parker of the Washington Post wrote, President Trump has decried the totally dishonest media with its fake news and fake books. He has argued that Google is biased against conservatives, and he has accused NBC News of fudging the tape of an interview with him that has been available online for more than a year. So when President Trump says fake news, what does he really mean? What is fake news? What does it mean to our democracy? What should we as citizens be concerned about when we talk about fake news? Well, we're going to take up those questions and much more. We have put together, I think, an excellent panel here tonight. And joining us this evening, Zhang, librarian at the Seattle Public Library, and the creator of the Fake News Survival Guide. It's a 2-hour course that people can come and take at the Seattle Public Library, and it is free, and I encourage you to go and check it out. Also with us is David Horsey. He is the Pulitzer Prize-winning political cartoonist, formerly of the Seattle PI, the Los Angeles Times, and he's coming back home again to join the Seattle Times to do some work. We're very pleased to have him with us and to talk about this issue. We're also pleased to have with us Jevin West. He is the assistant professor at the University of Washington Information School and co-developer of what's become a very popular course, Calling BS. Now, I cleaned it up there, but normally he says the whole thing. So, but it's a very popular course. We'll talk more about how that all came about. And Marcus Harrison Green is here. He recently joined the Seattle Times as a staff reporter covering South King County. He is also the former co-founder of the South Seattle Emerald, a community-based online publication. Would you please give them a warm welcome? Well, fake news. Why don't we start with this? And I actually like everybody to give me just a short definition of what you think fake news is or isn't and what it's doing to our society. But give me your short take on fake news.
Wow. So the definition that I kind of work with is false information or propaganda published under the guise of real news. So, you know, during the 2016 election, it was a big issue because a lot of these websites would pop up that would imitate real news websites. And they would get social media push and a lot of, you know, retweets and Facebook posts, and people wouldn't know that these are fake news stories. And so that's how a lot of this phenomena started, and actually a lot of patrons came to the library and asked us, you know, I'm reading this online, on Facebook, is this a real news story? It seems, you know, crazy, or it seems, I don't know how to check whether this is true or not. So, you know, we put our librarian hats on and we, you know, we gave them some tips and tools, but we really started looking deeper and kind of creating a curriculum to kind of teach some of these news literacy and information literacy skills.
We'll talk more about the class that you teach. Dave, your take on fake news.
By the president's definition, fake news is anything he doesn't like to hear, which is less of a problem than that there are a lot of people out there, and many of them who support him, who think real news is fake news and who think fake news is real news and then act on that. And it's, I think, becoming the biggest problem for our democracy. Because if we can't agree on what facts are, what reality is, then it's much more difficult to have rational discussion and intelligent voters. So yeah, I think it's in a way the biggest danger to this country that we face.
Calling BS.
Yeah, no, I'll stick away from the real term since we're on TV. Don't want to get you charged with any fine or anything. I would say, just to add on to some of the definitions so far, there's an aspect, the intention aspect, I think, is important to us when we try to define fake news. So it's deliberate either obfuscation or deliberate misleading of information. And at least in the academic world, we try to sway away from fake news because of the loaded term that it carries, depending on the context and the way it's delivered. So we use different terms. One term that's used is misinformation, but misinformation can include honest mistakes and the non-nefarious information that sort of gets out there, and it might just be something that an editor makes a mistake with. The term that we sort of have settled on more, at least in the study of this, is disinformation. So disinformation has a deliberate intention to mislead and sort of move people away from the truth. And we see these sort of disinformation campaigns happening with foreign adversaries. We also see it. We see it with industry. The tobacco story that occurred several decades ago. There were disinformation campaigns. I will say one thing about fake news. Like a lot of people know, it's been around forever. The term itself, if you look on Google,
this is nothing new.
This is nothing new.
In
journalism, many probably here already know this. There's a term called yellow journalism, and that's been around a long, long time. And propaganda itself has since the dawn of communication. So the sort of rise of fake news, I think what's rising is the term and sort of its usage, but something we've always battled. But I will say this about today's time is that the intensity and the digital environments in which it can fester and sort of spread, I think, is different than it has been before.
Marcus, your take.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if I can add anything more other than to say that in the Times newsroom, it's the ultimate oxymoron. It's simply just lies. And being in the truth business as we are, it's you realize that there's so many people who want to continue to engage in fantasy in this sort of a la carte style that we have in terms of people going to different places for journalism, quote unquote, are news that they want to hear, not news that necessarily is true. For us, this is another pinnacle moment in terms of us, doubling down on doing great reporting, doubling down on the truth, realizing that the truth doesn't owe you or anyone comfort or happiness or joy. It just owes you pure honesty. And whether people want to engage with that or not, unfortunately, that's not our business. Our business is to provide the truth.
Well, let's talk about what the term fake news and the fact that, with Donald Trump and becoming president, and he continues to hammer this and, gets people riled up at rallies. But what is it doing to legitimate journalism these days? I mean, journalism is challenged already as it is. And it seems to me that, you're putting even more of a cloud over journalism and journalists. And creating, in some respects, sort of a scary environment,
Absolutely. It's becoming a threatening environment. And, Donald Trump is sort of to me, the result of years of this becoming a growing phenomenon. I mean, we throughout American history, we've had periods of fake news, I guess, where crazy ideas, false things were spread around. But I think I don't want to lay it all on the right wing because there's a lot of craziness to go around. But I think the phenomenon that I've observed in the last 30 years is, with the rise of talk radio, somehow that found an audience that on the right that the left has never been able to match. And so year after year after year, you had people like Rush Limbaugh and some of the lesser, louder people who we're putting out a message, not only can you not trust government, but you can't trust the liberal news media. They're making up stuff. And after a generation of this, really, they're at least maybe a third of the people in this country who believe that, totally. And probably 80% of the Republican Party. That's a change from, when I was growing up, we had 3 broadcast networks and everyone read newspapers, and so you'd be liberal, conservative, whatever, you kind of agreed on the basic shape of reality, and then you argued about what to do about it, what the solutions are for the challenges. But now that's simply not there, because you have a significant amount of the population who do not trust factual reporting, because it's easily discounted, because this is the fake news, liberal media, and certainly in the last couple of years, that's been heightened. The rhetoric has been heightened, so that it's becoming, there is the fear that it's going to become a dangerous environment for journalists just trying to do their jobs.
Right before we came in here, we were talking in our the room back there, and our producer Kim Hill said, there's a civil war of information going on right now, which I wrote down right away, saying, that's a good term. Yeah. Agree?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to sort of build off, I think that trust and that breakdown of trust coming from some of these disinformation campaigns, they've been quite successful in sort of breaking trust in these institutions that democracy depends on. You look at these recent Pew surveys, like journalists, of course, are, the distrust is going up, the trust is going down. Even universities have now been viewed as sort of an institution worth sort of questioning. Cartoonists, for sure. I mean, who would ever trust a cartoonist?
You guys
the one group maybe that's doing okay is maybe the librarians. So maybe we should look to our librarians a little bit. But yeah, I think there is a real fear. If we really care about preserving democracy, we depend on journalists. We depend on the ability to question power, to be able to ask questions that aren't comfortable, that you may not like. And I think also, I mean, and journalism's, certainly, under the microscope for sure, I think, but generally the institutions in our democracy are, you look to that one friend on Facebook to trust anymore, because you can't trust any of these institutions. And that's, if you're trying to knock down a country, that's more powerful than a nuclear bomb, probably.
Yeah. Want to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. That being said, there are Pew polls that show that it's national news, for the most part, that is mistrusted. Yeah. Local news, a majority of people actually still do trust. Because I say, local news isn't just in the news business, it's supposed to be in the relationship business. You're supposed to have a relationship with the people that you cover. You're supposed to be an expert in the area. And so I do think that while, yes, nationally we're having some issues, I do think locally there is still, some hope, if you will, of maybe bridging some divides.
The big challenge there is keeping local news alive.
Yeah,
local journalism
that's
alive.
The one thing I tell my students is the most important thing. If someone could come up with a way of financially supporting local news, I think it's the most important thing that we can do with all these news deserts that are occurring across our country.
Okay, let's talk a bit about what the library is doing, what also how you're calling BS and what's happening there. Tell me about really how you kind of took on this issue and created what the library is doing in the survival guide of identifying fake news.
Yeah, as I said earlier, this became a real issue, not only in public discourse, but our patrons started coming to us about fact-checking and how to find reliable sources. And so I was one of the librarians that was tasked with coming up with a curriculum and starting to teach these skills to the public. In doing kind of my research and checking with other library systems and watching lectures like Jevin's online, And just gathering information, as a librarian does, I started looking at the economics of it, and many of you kind of alluded to how things have shifted. Traditional news media, their sources of revenue, have started to dry up. People are going online, where it's more of a click-driven economy of news and information, and things that drive the clicks are what's going to generate that revenue. And so if you can create these salacious stories and get people to click on your site and generate ad revenue for you, then that's kind of the game, right? That's the name of the game when we're online. And there's a great book by Charles Seif called Virtual Unreality that kind of breaks down this economy, new online news economy. And so those are some of the things that I kind of dug into and incorporated into the curriculum. And really it's about creating community conversations like this, an opportunity to talk with people about, okay, what are some good habits to have when we're online and searching for information, and how do we check our sources? So yeah.
So there's also terms here that you've come up with that you point out, like clickbait and things like this. Let's talk about
Exactly.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, so clickbait, if you're not aware, I mean, it's we kind of have a general idea of what it is, but essentially it's, the idea of drawing in clicks. And it doesn't matter, it's not really about the content of what's on your webpage, right? It's maybe that headline that's, really salacious or really, crazy, and it just is there to get the click. So once they've done the click, they've done the job of adding that revenue to your business, your website.
So, yeah, it's about money. Okay, calling BS.
Yeah, no, and I'll
talk about how this thing came about. I
I
was telling you before, I'd love to have been able to take a course in college called with that title. Yeah.
Well, actually, most of us on our CVs and our resumes, we put, mathematical biology or microbiologist. Now I get to put BS studies on my CV, so that's pretty fun.
That'll catch you.
Yeah, but I will just say something about that revenue too, because I think it's so important. I've been to several conferences where these social media companies, they recognize that they are feeding the beast, that if you can create a story that will blow someone's mind, if you put those will blow your mind if you sort of read this, or, the one I like was 7 kittens that look like Robert De Niro or something. I mean, you're going to click on those kinds of things, even though that one's sort of, not a bad one. These are the kinds of things that are driving people to create fake news. There's propaganda. We can't stop. We try to stop it, but that financial source that people have right now, sitting in their pajamas on their couch, creating these crazy stories, can make a lot of money. So I think it's a really important point that Day is making there. So the class came about mainly because in my professional life as a scientist, I kept seeing an almost kind of fake news-ness. It's not quite as bad in science as it is in the general public, but we have our own problems, and we should be holding ourselves to higher standards. So we have issues of predatory journals, what's called publication bias, where we publish only the things that get positive results, et cetera. And we wanted to teach students how to read the primary literature and also deal with a lot of these kinds of problems that they're seeing in their digital world. But the real focus on the class is my area of expertise, which is to teach the public and students how to deal with BS that's wrapped in data, in graphics, in numbers and statistics and algorithms. I'll give you an example. There's one tweet that went out from the National Review that says, the only climate graph you ever need to see. And what they did is they took real data and they plotted the temperatures of the Earth over the last 100 years. But they zoomed out so far that it looked like a flat line. So what are we worried about? I mean, why we have all this talk around climate change? Well, this thing, of course, got tweeted a whole bunch of times, and it was just a simple trick. Zooming out far enough, you can make anything look like a straight line. And it's these kinds of things that I see every single day. So our goal, of course, we talk about fake news. We talk about sort of spotting BS and refuting BS, but it's really about trying to teach people how to reason with data.
So what's the thing that people need to be most aware of? When I mean, we're in an online world now anymore. I mean, it's not just the 24-hour cable thing, but you go online and you constantly see. We have social media, and there's a whole different thing going on there. What do we need to do? Always call BS on everything?
Well, no. I mean, we don't. Like, I'm very careful when I go into high schools because I don't want them to become a bunch of nihilists or people that just don't have any trust in any institutions. We want them to have some foundation. What we do is we start really simple, especially when I'm talking to like high schools. Just question your source. This is something that journalists do really well. Like, who's telling me this? How do they know it? And what do they have to gain from it? Just those 3 questions right there are a great place to start. And if something sounds too good to be true, or too bad to be true, it probably is. And these simple kinds of lessons that we can keep reminding ourselves and create habits of mind or habits of practice when calling BS, I think can be helpful for all of us, including me, because I get duped a lot myself.
I want to move over and talk to Leonard Garfield here from MOHAI, the guy in charge of MOHAI. As a historian, someone that has followed not only historical events, but disinformation and propaganda in our history. Been there for ages.
Yeah, it's been there forever. As Professor West said, I think the expectation that there be truth in media is really an invention of the mid-20th century. Even, Enrique, if you go back as recently as the 1920s or 30s, media, journalism was expected to be partisan, to be sensational, to be fun, very seldom to be expected to be truly truthful. Somehow we got that more in our empirical experience of the world. By the mid-20th century, though, as we truly created a national economy, a national culture, we ended up with a few true sources of news, 3 networks, a few national journals, and we began to have a common understanding of what the truth was. Now we're ending up in a more fragmented media environment, very similar to what we had 100 years ago.
Yes, there was a time when actually the yellow journalism, sensational journalism sold.
That was the biggest seller. That's what got people to buy papers. That and the introduction of cartoons in color on the front page. It was really a source of entertainment, not a source of facts, as much as we came to expect in the years after World War II. So in a sense, we're grappling again with that notion of how can we have a unified sense of reality and truth in our media? Are we really a unified country? I think that's at the root of what is propelling so much fake news, is we're really not a United States as much as we had been in recent decades.
Yeah, we're definitely struggling with that whole division thing. How has social media impacted what's going on here? But I mean, I was saying to David before we came on here, some of the Twitter comments I got about you, or one in particular, and thought about responding to it and thought I better not do that. But I mean, now social media, from Twitter to Facebook to Instagram to all of that, really have an influence and an effect on what people think, believe, and how they can express themselves and say something and hide, actually, more than anything else. How's that impacted what you do?
Well, it's had a huge impact. And I think it is part of the phenomenon that I suspect there are a majority of people in this country, maybe in the world, probably in the world, who see facts as relative or as sort of up for grabs. That they're no longer hard things that just are true. It's like, do I agree with that? Well, all my friends on Facebook don't. But I think, I don't think most people understand what professional journalism is anymore. And part of that is what Leonard was talking about, that in the past, it was kind of a curious area where there was plenty of yellow journalism, a lot of journalism written from the publisher's point of view. And especially after Watergate, you've got highly responsible media, but also a very critical media that looked at politicians and the political process in a much different way, much tougher way, and that's upset a lot of people. And then with the development of cable news, and then with social media, you get this. We're in a world of opinion. People doing blogs that are basically taking something from news somebody else reported and stating an opinion about it. MSNBC, CNN, and Fox every night, basically, in various levels of quality, are opinion shows. And I think a lot of people think that's what journalism is. And so have no idea that a newspaper like the Seattle Times or the New York Times or the LA Times or any of those times have processes that are very strict, and that you can't just make up stuff. No matter what Rush Limbaugh says or the president. Journalists, real journalists, don't make up things, but a lot of people believe they do. And so what's written in the Washington Post, for many people, has no more value than what they've read in some online blog or in something that came through a Twitter feed from some Russian bot. And so that ability to discern, what's valuable information and what is a con job is disappearing.
What's the challenge for you as a guy that is a daily staff writer for the Seattle Times and making sure that people understand the difference between what you are writing is writing fact and based and the facts that you collect versus you writing an opinion piece? Because I think there's a real challenge there.
Right. I mean, I think it's the fact that it's given steroids to the axiom that a lie is halfway around the world before the truth, gets its shoes on. Now a lie is like lapped it 3 times and now it's running backwards, taunting the truth. And for us, it's just, it's trying to convince people, and it's unfortunate that you have to, that they should prioritize the truth over something that their friend retweeted and blogged from some, Russian bot or somebody. And so for us, it's just making sure that we can kind of reestablish trust and reestablish a relationship with folks who have sort of written us off. And I remember talking to a friend of mine who went to college with me, and went to college in a very conservative area of the United States. And as soon as I told him that I was working with the Seattle Times, he automatically stopped following me on Twitter because he thought that I was working for the liberal elite and that we're, in the newsroom, curling our mustaches and seeing how we can, do damage to the rest of the country. And I can promise you that is not the case. But, so unfortunately, I'm not sure how you convince people, that you are, attempting to do righteous work and you are here in the public's interest in the public sphere as the fourth estate.
How do we get people to, this is the business you're in,
Right.
to realize what's real and what is not, and then also what your responsibility is, I guess, as a citizen in our democracy to understand this.
Exactly, and I think the challenge, and people don't want to hear this or do this, but you have to get comfortable with perspectives that do not echo what you believe. And one big thing about the technology culture that we're in and the social media culture is, and just the technology itself, is this idea of the filter bubble, that when you're online, these websites like Google or Facebook or all these companies, they collect information on you because you're the consumer. And so they collect that data and they feed back things that you would like or you would agree with because it gets you to participate more or stay on their website or shop for their products. And so this creates a filter bubble where you're only getting information that reflects your viewpoint and your interests. And that's highly dangerous for a democracy where we're trying to exchange ideas and kind of come to a less biased conclusion, right, on the facts. And so I talk a lot about websites like allsides.com, which present news from different parts of the political spectrum. Like they'll have a column for the left, center, and right. And those are rated by the users of the website. And so it's really kind of like an online town hall where you can kind of like, you can contribute your viewpoint and you can kind of see like, oh, other people are feeling like this news source is conservative or liberal. And also you're exposed to those. And so getting outside of our comfort zone, following people that we may disagree with, but that we have respect for and trust that they do due diligence with their information. And just something as simple as reading the article or reading, actually consuming the content, because oftentimes we just go by the headline, we just retweet. It's so easy just to, share without actually looking at the content. What is it saying? What is the source? Can I find corroborative evidence? And so just taking some of that time and taking a step back, no matter how we might feel emotionally about, the content. Those are some of the things I cover, and I try to follow even though it's hard.
Yeah, because it changes so much and so fast. What do your students say to you? I mean, you're dealing in, it's a whole different world now. Because,
No, I mean, students are always smarter than we, I think the adults give them credit for. They're actually, what they're really, I think, good at are identifying the kinds of digital tricks that we find, so misformatting of web pages that sort of indicates it might not be a reliable website, or sort of strange things with the domains, or the fonts and templates. But what they do still struggle with, again, when it has to do with any sort of quantitative information, but I think they're still in that stage of understanding the environment in which they live. These are digital natives. They grew up in this world where they're always online. And I think trying to teach them sort of what the objective functions are for Facebook, for example. And it's purely, just like Dave was saying, the objective is to keep you on as long as possible. And if the algorithm can run a bunch of A/B tests and figure out that you sort of stay on this conspiracy-laden video longer, that's the stuff they're going to deliver. And one disturbing thing that sort of has come out of several reports recently is that places like YouTube, you can go to the most neutral of topics. And one for me, my son right now, my 7-year-old son loves the International Space Station, the live feed from the International Space Station. And when I go there in incognito mode, this is the mode where your browser doesn't really know who you are, my recommendations next to this International Space Station it's not a controversial topic, this isn't even vaccinations or anything like that, will say, well, I'll get 3 or 4 flat Earth recommendations. Flat Earth, International Space Station, I mean, I can see the curvature of the Earth as we're going around, really fast. So these algorithms have different objective functions than what might be positive things for society. I mean, maybe if we, created different objective functions for these algorithms, maybe they would be better for society. So students the questions they ask are, what is it about these environments that sort of facilitate the spread of these things? And I think that's part of it. Also, these echo chambers that form are a lot of result of, just aside from the technology, things that are sort of, down to the deepest levels of what we call epistemology, how we know things. And so this idea that if I look at the world and I observe, I would hope that most people would sort of use observation rather than whether I'm a part of a tribe. We call it tribal epistemology. So I accept something not because it's necessarily true, but because it's sort of allegiance to whatever group I'm a part of. And I think that's a big problem. That's aside from even the technology, and also this idea that we're all asked to be the gatekeepers of our information now. We used to rely more on these well-trained journalists that have this training and they have a reputation attached to it. As an anonymous troller in the news environment, I don't have a reputation to lose. I can say something crazy and off the wall, and the next day I wake up and I don't lose my job because of it. And I think this idea that we're supposed to be the producers and the gatekeepers is kind of a scary thing for a democracy that depends on collective decision-making. We rely on gatekeepers. I want those gatekeepers there, and they've sort of been kind of washed out with everyone's ability to do
Standards. Where are the standards?
Well, tribalism, I think that's an important word. And that's why I'm not exactly hopeful about our situation, because we have one of the most ancient human impulses, tribalism, that is now paired with the most powerful communications network ever conceived. And right now, tribalism's winning. All our different tribes are finding our spaces on this vast internet, and our tendency is always to take in the information and believe the information that makes us feel more comfortable and more part of whatever group we identify with. And I'm not entirely sure how to break that link, no matter how many classes we have in schools about being critical of information, or however assertive and responsible our mainstream media is. It's going to be a huge challenge, and it may be a real paradigm shift in how our country operates, our democracy operates, because democracy depends on people disagreeing, but eventually coming to some center place where there's common ground. And there's not a whole lot of common ground when you've got people breaking up in tribes and feeling very comfortable and reinforced where they are.
Yeah. When you were running South Seattle Emerald, that was a community-based thing. What was the challenge there to also make sure that people were realizing that what you were bringing to the table was quality content, real content that was real, that was, that it wasn't fake?
Yeah, no, I think it was establishing myself and the organization as a producer of content that was reliable, and while doing that from eating macaroni and cheese in my mother's basement. That's literally how it came about. But and that meant showing up, and that meant being present, being there. There's a reason why at the time, I get a check from the Seattle Times now, so I don't want to down them too much, but there was a reason at the time that people were looking at the Emerald versus the Seattle Times who lived in South Seattle, because their reasoning was that the Times only showed up in times of trauma, when there was a shooting or there was some domestic violence or something like that. So then they associated the Times' presence with trauma. And so our relationship was a little bit different. We were there, good times, ill, bad, great times, as somebody in a relationship would be. And so for me, it was the hardship, if you will, but also what ended up also being a very edifying thing was showing up every day to establish a relationship. And again, like I said, we're less in the news business these days and more in the relationship business. You are more in a brand ambassador, if you will, for the publication you work for.
And now you're with the Times, and
I am, yes.
Trying to do that.
The check cashes every 2 weeks, Enrique.
Well, that's good. I would like to invite folks that if you have a question or comment, please come on up right here, and I would work you into the conversation. Please do come on up. We got a great panel here, and I'm sure that they'll be happy to hear from you. Well, David, one thing I want to ask you about is a guy who, in many respects, you observe things going on, and then you create these cartoons or images and satire or whatever, I don't know how you describe them completely. But you're taking sometimes things and kind of pointing out a bit of a story, but sometimes the absurdity of things. When you have done your work that focuses on fake news, what do you do? I mean, what are you looking at, and what have you done?
Well, you know what? My job feels different than it did 20 years ago. I used to be the guy out here, you know, sort of pushing the edge, pushing the envelope, exaggerating reality, you know, having fun with it. You know, satire is an exaggeration and simplification. These days, I don't feel like I'm exaggerating anything. I'm just illustrating. And
then it changes on you 5 minutes later.
Yeah, and I think what's changed for me, too, is I used to enjoy exchanges with people who disagreed with me. Someone would call up and tell me I'm an idiot, and then we'd talk about whatever it was they were interested in. And now it's just... it's sort of like either you're on my side or you are evil. Even the humor aspect of what I do doesn't, it's not as funny for some people as it used to be. People have kind of lost their sense of humor, and they expect you to be on one side or the other. And sometimes I do cartoons that throw off my liberal fans, and it's like, what's happened to you? You know, the immediate thought is, you joined the other side. No, I didn't. I actually thought about something, and maybe it's more complex than you think it is. So when I try to discuss fake news, I mean, you know, I guess I've given up the idea that I'm going to change anyone's mind, but I still think it's important for me to put out my thoughts there about a whole range of issues, including trying to make a point over and over again that, you know, not everything, you can't believe everything you hear, and you know, that there are actually people out there trying to do a good job of presenting something, a version of reality that's as close to factual as possible. I'm at the barricades trying to fight off disinformation and tribalism and this feeling that we have to, you know, just all go into our silos and have this information civil war.
But yet we also know that 2016, that the Russians played with our election. And that wasn't fake news, folks. That was a reality check. And we still are wondering, okay, is that going to happen in our midterms? Is that going to happen in the next presidential election? That's kind of scary stuff for a democracy.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. And I have fellow researchers that are looking into this. This is what they do on a daily basis. And the problem keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. When it first came out, there was this, you know, this discussion, you know, even pre-2016, that the Russians might be involved in, you know, trying to sway public opinion, sort of move the needle in certain areas. Or in their case, and this has been documented in many forms way before these issues that we're having today around you know, establishing these disinformation campaigns, where it's not even just left or right, it's just trying to add noise into the system. And at first, when this came out, even the social media companies like Facebook, it's like, well, I don't know how we could have had an effect. You know, we have, you know, some, you know, maybe Russian bots on our system, but it's not that big of a problem. Well, then it went from like, well, a couple million to then 126 million people exposed to this kind of propaganda. Then it went to these fake accounts, which a lot of people from the research world have been yelling at the tech industry, say, do a better job of reporting the real accounts and not sort of these fake accounts, which is not a trivial thing to do even from their standpoint. But I don't know if you've read this. This news sort of kind of fell under, I think, a mattress a little bit. But Facebook, during congressional hearings a couple weeks ago, admitted that they had to delete 500 million accounts. And when they're advertising that they have 2 billion people using their platform, deleting 500 million fake accounts, we're working in a system with a large proportion of bots and fake accounts. And that's disturbing to me, that if it was just people, we could maybe sort it out as humanity. But when there's that many fake accounts, that's something that we should be worrying about.
Yeah. Again, any questions, comments? Come on up here. I'd like to work you into the conversation. I have a mic. I know how to use it. Here you go. I got the mic.
Oh, okay. My name is Jessica, and I'm actually kind of studying this. I'm a UW grad student. So when I went to J school 10 years ago, the big thing was news. The business of news was over with the new media way of presenting news. There was no business anymore around it. So I guess what I'm looking at now, 10 years later, is I still think that fake news came into fruition because of the issue of the economic model around news. And I know we talked about this, but I kind of want to hear a little bit more about what you guys are thinking around maybe brainstorming new economic models around news and how that would change maybe the consumption of fake news and the fruition of fake news.
Yeah. Money comes back to the money.
Yeah.
All right. Good question. Other questions, come on up here. I'll take your question. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a big proponent of some sort of public financing model. I think it's the European Media Institute where they have talked about potentially these social media organizations like Facebook, like Twitter, paying some sort of tax that would go into a fund that would be directed towards journalism institutions. I think having something like that maybe you mix with the idea of a democracy voucher system, where if you're liberal or you're center left or center right or far right, whatever, you can use your $50 voucher or whatever you can direct that at the Breitbart of Seattle, or you can direct it at the Seattle Times, or you can direct it wherever, so that you yourself are participating in the business of news.
Other thoughts on that?
Well, the main business model that seems to be working is find a really, really rich guy to buy your newspaper. I mean, the Washington Post is flourishing ever since Jeff Bezos bought it.
Yeah.
The LA Times was just bought by a billionaire, and everyone's happy about that. I'm not sure if that will work everywhere, but in Seattle, you'd think there's enough money here, there's got to be some billionaire.
Yeah.
The only thing I was going to say is it's one of the biggest questions, I think, in journalism. This is figuring out a model. We all know how important it is, but I'm not an expert in the field. I just look to my colleagues who are in journalism, and they have to go to their editors and say, this is how many downloads we have, instead of, this is how good the story, what the impact that the story had in the field. So it's a super hard question. I don't
Yeah, it is a tough one because it's now, analytics. And who's watching you and who's paying attention to you and what their ages are and those types of things. It's made it that much more difficult to continue to be able to do the work. But it's important work. Go ahead.
Hi there. I don't know whether this is an exception that proves the rule about what we're talking about tonight, but recently the New York Times ran a story about Rod Rosenstein and what he was prepared to wear a wire, and he was trying to get people to get the cabinet together for the 25th Amendment. That story, the White House did not object to that story and brand it as fake news. They seem to have accepted the substance of that story. That seems to be somewhat an aberration for what they tend to view of the failing New York Times. What's your impression of that?
Well, I think it was not fake because it fed into their narrative. It's only fake if it doesn't fit into the agenda of the White House, and which, every White House has struggled with the press. This is a White House that has gone way beyond just the usual dissatisfaction and has branded, the media the enemy. But, when a story comes out that actually they can interpret, because that story essentially proved that there is this, deep state conspiracy. So it reinforced a meme that they had out there. I mean, what's interesting is since that, Rosenstein seems to be okay with Trump.
As we speak right now, but that could change, It
will.
Yeah, I just have a question because we've been talking about this as if the internet is a public forum. And I know that constitutionally and legally, that's still kind of an open-ended question with Facebook controlling who gets to say what and where, and Twitter removing Alex Jones. And regardless of what you think about Alex Jones, it's still one of those areas that it seems need to be addressed. And so I'm wondering what avenues the government has and what you think they should do to kind of control this new area of communication.
And Alex Jones was the guy that had the conspiracy theory and about Sandy Hook and that it didn't happen, other things, and then making quite a bit of money on the side selling products or whatever he was doing, been pulled off of Facebook and other social media. Just a little background there. I thought I'd throw that in.
Yeah, and the Alex Jones one it's an interesting example because being pulled off then gets him even more attention. They actually say, well, who is this guy if you've never heard of? I'll go check him out. And so I think it's hard to sort of, pick and choose which one, even though I have, I'm just completely against what Alex Jones is doing. But this is a really interesting question, I think, that you're asking. I think that, the tech companies, when I interact with these organizations, they see themselves as a public forum, and they feel like they're doing sort of social good. But it goes back to kind of what I was saying before. If their objective is to either keep you on the system or keep you looking at as many ads, that's not really a public forum anymore, as I think what you're kind of getting at. And I think a big question that's been entering into more and more conversations is whether we should regulate these social media companies. And it's a funny thing because we regulate medicine and even aerospace and education and all these other areas, but why aren't we asking questions of this industry that's having as important of an impact on society as almost anything out there? I mean, even basic questions like how many of your users are actual users would be a nice thing to actually report to the public. And I think this general data protection regulation that's gone into place, this GDPR in Europe, is a good model for the U.S. to start looking at. For those that aren't familiar, it's really at trying to protect people's information, and they're really simple things like if a company like Chase Bank, your information gets stolen, they have to let you know within 72 hours, and you get to know how your information is being sold. And it's this kind of regulation that I think we should be thinking about for these big social tech companies. I know they don't like that, but I think it's about time as citizens that we start asking the questions that get right what you're talking about, whether, if they want to be this public forum, then we need to think about some regulation.
I wanted to ask a question or describe something and then get your feedback from it. There's a chart that I've seen a year or two ago. It's a chart that's a media bias, media quality chart. At the center and at the top is faithful reporting of facts. And as you go further to the left, you get the more liberal view, to the right, more conservative. Further down is more liberties taken on facts, as they describe this. And at the top center is like Associated Press and Reuters reporting. And Fox and Huffington Post and all that's further down. So what I've done to try to determine facts, assuming that this chart's got some truth to it, is to put Associated Press and Reuters apps on my phone and read news from that. And I just wondered what you guys thought of that.
I think it's a great idea. Never heard. I'll have to mention this to my students. I mean, because we talk about, we have them build these infographics about what they trust and sort of pyramids of trust. And you know what they put on the bottom, which always fascinates me, is Wikipedia, which for me, and I'm already getting old, where I think, actually, Wikipedia is not too bad, at least in my era. I would certainly put others further down, but they're like, well, people can, everyone can sort of edit that, and I can see where they're coming from. But you know what? They never put, actually, of all the infographics I've seen, I've never seen them put the Associated Press or Reuters in there. And maybe this is a question I should pose to them and even to myself. I think it's a really interesting idea. I think I'll throw it out to the class and see what happens.
Well, what's interesting, especially the Associated Press, AP does a lot of original reporting, but it's also kind of all the newspapers in the United States are members of the Associated Press. That's what it is. So there's stories from the mainstream media all over the place. But it's interesting that it may be more trusted because it's somehow, it's an entity that's above it all in a way, even though it's an aggregator of all the press that a lot of people mistrust. But I think the wire services like Reuters and AP just have this, there's this sense that they don't have the same identity. Partly they don't do that much opinion writing. Right. It's like
they're covering stories.
This is the news. Even though, as we all know, in every piece of journalism comes from some viewpoint, from some angle on the world.
Yeah. Well, actually, my question is kind of similar to that right there. So I get when people talk about, what's responsible journalism, a lot of times they're just like, why don't you just report what people say instead of actually trying to filter out. And I look at that as like, a reporter versus a journalist as somebody who might be trying to seek for some kind of truth within words, and then other ones who just kind of report what is said. But the danger a lot of times in just kind of reporting people say is especially when somebody is saying something which is false. And then you get into the problem of by repeating it continuously, especially in these higher trusted medias and such, that repeating it continuously, you end up becoming, the false thing becomes truth in people's minds. And it's like, how do you go and try to avoid having that kind of happen by being able to report that this is false instead of just keep on reporting things over and over again. This person said this person says this, but kind of have that balance in there.
Well, I think that's another important part of this phenomenon of because more and more mainstream media outlets have realized that the idea of perfect objectivity has that problem of, if you're reporting this person said this person said this, that seems objective, except if this person's lying or making up something, then you, as you said, you're passing on misinformation. So more and more, a lot of newspapers in particular have shifted to saying, pointing out the lie or the misinformation, but that is, I think, fed into some of the mistrust, because if people say, well, how come you're telling me what's true or not? Well, because I know that it's the media making a claim that we know this is not a fact and this is. For some people, that's a little hard to swallow. And I think, too, something else that feeds into this is kind of part of it is, as I said, there's no perfect objectivity, no perfect, no biased report anywhere. If I were an evangelical person living in Iowa, and I looked around at all the newspapers and media in the country, that basically when they talk about, for instance, gay marriage, it's usually a positive thing. It's like, you're celebrating this advance. You're writing about this gay couple that now, they've lived together for 50 years, now they can marry. put in a positive light. That makes perfect sense to everybody in Seattle, I suppose. But for some people, it's like, that's the media expressing a value that I don't agree with. And I think that has added to this idea. It's the liberal news media. In one sense, that's not inaccurate. There tends to be, in most of the journalism world, a bias toward progressive ideas. And so, calling right and wrong or true or false on the facts, there are people who don't trust these elitists to make those choices for them, even though, personally, I think it's necessary.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions here? Sorry. Come on up.
So there was mention about regulating social media. I was wondering what specifically that might look like, because it's true that, social media applications are designed to keep users interested and engaged. I would say that most of the time there's no real malicious intent behind that. It's based off of observing how people behave and then creating content that encourages people to click on it. And sometimes people take advantage of that. The fake news examples that we've been talking about. And they are increasing, doing more work to help protect against fake users, bots, and so on. But so just curious as to what would regulation around that area look like?
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm usually on the side of not wanting to regulate, at least in the tech space, in some aspects, just because of innovation. You get a lot of innovation without it. But I think the simplest area would be around maybe algorithmic accounting, bots, fake accounts. Those would be my sort of lowest hanging fruit that I would go after. I have colleagues that would go a step further. But I think in its simplest sense, just tell us what you're doing to protect when users when users have information stolen. When there's fake accounts, can you at least give us, the public, a sense of how they don't want to give away how their algorithms work? It's kind of their secret sauce. But maybe there could be some accounting for things like biases that we know exist in their algorithms. We know there's a lot of these algorithms are being used to help judges make decisions on recidivism, and we know there's been racial bias and those kinds of things. We know that there's been problems in algorithms on identifying certain kinds of images, and so it's some sort of accounting on not necessarily the tech companies themselves, but these sort of algorithms underneath. So it's easier said than done. So I would say the biggest thing, if I had one thing, it would be just tell me. Let's have a conversation about the bots on your system. That'd be the first one, and then we could stop and wait for a few years and see if that help things a little bit.
Leonard.
Enrique, I think there may be one silver lining from Seattle history, and it's something Marcus said, and that's the strength of local journalism in Seattle's own history. If we look at the history of the Blessing family in the Seattle Times, it gets better every decade. Didn't start out great, ended up great. The Bullitt family and King TV, which you've been associated with, or more recently, the glory years of the PI, but also Crosscut and the work Marcus did with community newspaper. I think it's only part of the answer, but I think where strong journalism still thrives and can continue to thrive is in our strong local communities, and Seattle really does have a century of that tradition.
Keeping that alive that's the challenge of with local journalism especially, but I think there's really a commitment here to do so and to make sure that happens. Just two other things I wanted to get at. One is this, is that, what do we do? We have a commander-in-chief that constantly just, says media is just horrible. And how do you deal with something like that? Dave? Marcus? I'm curious. You hear this, and as journalists.
Yeah, you just do your job, right? You do it despite him. We've had lockdowns at the Seattle Times because people have taken to heart that it's the journalism is the enemy of the people. You have Obviously, there have been shootings in the past 2 high-profile shootings in the past 2 years in newsrooms. The fact is, though, as my managing editor says, the people who are attempting to make this world a worse place, didn't take the day off today, and they worked, overtime on holidays. And so it's the same thing that we have to do in journalism, is to, again, hold truth to power. Speak truth to power, but more so speak truth to people who believe that they're powerless, reminding them that they are not. Yeah.
Well, it's not the most comfortable environment, but it's still, being a journalist or being a political cartoonist in this country is a lot safer than it is in Mexico or most countries in the world. It's Russia. Yeah. North Korea. But it's a dangerous job most places. And I think the thing that Americans need to remember, even if you hate the mainstream liberal media, it can be a lot worse without free, independent press. And they're just, look around the world, there are huge examples of that. And I think even Donald Trump doesn't quite mean what he says. He loves the media. He thrives on the media. So people in his rallies get churned up, but I still think even with what polls say about where journalists are held in how much they're held in contempt, I think we're not quite to the point where people are ready to give up what we have. They may be less ready to give up their guns than their newspaper, but still, they don't want to give up their newspaper either, or their free media. They may not like the nature of it. They may not like what they're reading because it's critical of things they believe in, but they're not ready to say, shut them down.
Yeah. From your standpoint, Dave, give me a final sense of what you want people to know about what you do and what you're trying to do and why it's important.
Sure. Well, what I try to do in my personal life with this topic, as well as a librarian in the classes that I teach, is kind of just model the kind of behavior I'm asking people to do. Like in my classes, I give plenty of examples of where I've fallen short of my own criteria and times when I've been duped. As Jevin said, no one's an expert because there's just so much money to be made and the stakes are so high that people get so creative at duping you. And it's kind of just having that humility, like, oh, here's what happened, and here are some steps that you can take to kind of protect yourself against being duped or falling for a false story. I use this example of one time that I went to a conference and I Googled, it was in Olympia, and I was looking to book a room at Red Lion Hotel, right? So I Googled Red Lion Olympia, and I clicked on the first search result, and it ended up being a sponsored ad on Google, and they made me pay a $45 tax that I couldn't get refunded. And if I had just, paid a little more attention and, realized that, oh, those first three search results are paid advertisement, I wouldn't have fallen for that. And so, just using those examples and kind of just modeling what, good information behavior could look like, I feel like we all have to kind of have a little humility on top of intellectual curiosity. Like intellectual curiosity is one aspect, and then humility is just a huge thing that, is huge, I feel like.
Okay, so one plug for the library here is that your classes are free, right?
They are, yes.
They are. 2-hour classes, how often
Yes,
do they
and
have
our
them?
next one is November 27th at the Central Library, 2:30 to 4:30 p.m.
Okay, so you probably should call the Central Library and sign up.
Yeah, there's no advanced registration. You just show up and yeah, bring your questions, bring your ideas, and we're always looking to learn more about resources that you may know of or suggestions that you have about how to tackle this big issue that impacts all of us.
Okay, Jevin, to give you the final word as the guy who is always calling BS.
Yeah, well, I'd say the final word is thanks for coming. I mean, this, with the news that's on the TVs and the radios right now, I can't believe we even had anyone in here. So thanks a lot for coming.
It's been a news day here as we speak.
That was tough. But I think it's events like this. It's local journalism. It's coming back. It's sort of moving away from the technology and coming and talking in person. I think people, they behave so much different in person than they do online. And I think the more that we can put us in that physical space, again, is important. And there's all sorts of tips we can give people to be smarter consumers of information. I mean, one thing is, if you're looking at a news media site and you're not sure about it, look at simple things like, do they assign retractions? Do they make corrections, and how fast? And do they have that sort of humility, as Day says? There's all sorts of things that we can do, but I'm an optimist. I think my colleague, actually, that I work with is not an optimist. He thinks the world's going to hell in a handbasket. He's not so happy about the state of the world, but I think we've been through this before. I think we've had big jumps in information technology, and we got scared. Even during the printing press, there was all this talk about it, spewing out all this, this false information, and we got through it somehow. And I think, social media, I think overall can be good. It gives it gives a voice to diverse, it gives sort of a place for diverse voices to speak. And I think overall it's a good thing. We just have to figure out how to clean up the pollution.
Yeah. Final word there, Mr. Green?
Yeah, support local journalism.
Keep him employed. Yeah.
My final thought is, this is something I've said many times. It's something one of my professors in grad school said. He said there are 2 rules to be intellectually honest. One is, don't believe something just because some expert or authority or media outlet says it's true. And actually, a lot of us are pretty good with that. Question authority. The harder one for all of us is the second rule, which is don't believe something just because you agree with it. And man, I try to fight that every day, because sometimes your side is wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing is that we're fortunate that we do live in a country where we can still have some debate. And there's a lot of debate that is going on in this country right now. Please give a round of applause to our panel here. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it very much. Also, thank you to MOHAI for putting on these community conversations. I think we've been able to cover a lot of topics, and it's been nice just to have people come and have a conversation. Agree or disagree, which we need to do, and do it in a civil manner. So let's still try to do some good work out there and continue to try to break those divisions. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for joining for this edition of Community Conversation from MOHAI. Good night.